Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. And also a big round of applause to Patrick and the student activities team for helping us put this together. It's pretty exciting. And before we officially begin, I also want to just acknowledge some folks that we have who've joined us today. Dr. Bennett unfortunately couldn't be here. She is traveling at the moment, but we'll try to jump in if possible. But also Trustee Deborah Cada, Trustee Nazarene Johnson, Trustee Magdalena Gomez, our Vice President of Student Services, Marco de la Garza, Vice President of Admin Services, Lori Hopper, and Vice Chancellor, Cheryl Sullivan. And now I'd like to introduce our Vice President of Instruction, Monica Chahal, who will introduce our distinguished guest. Monica? Make sure we can unmute you here. Hold on.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Davis. I would like to first draw everyone's attention to the painting in my background. This is entitled Angela as Black Divinity. It's from 2020 by Fresno-based artist Kezia Harrell, who cites Dr. Davis as an influence on her own life. Through her activism and scholarship over the last decades, Angela Davis has been deeply involved in our nation's quest for social justice. Her work as an educator, both at the university level and in the larger public sphere, has always emphasized the importance of building communities of struggle for economic, racial, and gender justice. Dr. Davis is the author of 9 books and has lectured throughout the United States, as well as in Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and South America. In recent years, a persistent theme of her work has been the range of social problems associated with incarceration and the generalized criminalization of those communities that are most affected by poverty and racial discrimination. She draws upon her own experiences in the early 70s as a person who spent 18 months in jail and on trial after being placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Dr. Davis has also conducted extensive research on numerous issues related to race, gender, and imprisonment. Her most recent book is Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement. Like many other educators, Dr. Davis is especially concerned with the general tendency to devote more resources and attention to the prison system than to educational institutions. For me, Dr. Davis is a teacher, activist, feminist, human rights advocate, change agent, and visionary. And it is my honor, my great honor, to welcome her to Clovis Community College today. Dr. Davis, we are so happy to have you join us. Gurdeep, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Monica. So, Dr. Davis, welcome. So glad that you are here. A big thank you to the Student Success and Equity Committee for doing the work and bringing you here to join us. What we've done today is we're kind of set this up as just a conversation with you. And the questions that I'm about to ask actually are coming from members of the Student Success and Equity Committee. So we'll begin. Dr. Davis, community. The word community in America is steadily falling apart. There has been rapid decrease in political, civic, religious, and community engagement, and consequently, social trust. How do we revive community in America? And perhaps more specifically, how do we revive and or build a sense of community in disadvantaged populations?
Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate in your celebration of Black History Month. The first question that has been posed about community is a very important one. I think that forging community is perhaps the most important of all of our human practices. Because we are who we are precisely because of our relationships with others. And we cannot flourish except within community. But community community is never abstract. It is not about bringing people together simply for the sake of bringing them together. I think that community is always about the interplay between difference and unity. We unite, oftentimes we talk about uniting across our differences, as if we cannot unite with our differences. And so, I think that we should say that we unite with our differences and precisely through our differences in order to, I would say, embrace a collectively imagined future. And the person who asked the question posed it as a relationship between the past and the present. And I want to just say a few words about that, because we always imagine the past as much better than it actually was. And I think that what we are experiencing at this moment is the reluctance on the part of certain sectors of the population of this country to embrace new ways of imagining the future. We've been talking a great deal over the last couple of years about justice, about equality, about structural racism, about essential workers. And I think that we perhaps haven't been talking enough about what I would call structural constraints. We've been talking about structural racism, but we haven't been talking about the ways in which human beings are not receiving what we all deserve as human beings because of the structure of capitalism. So I'm talking about a situation when profit becomes more important than providing food and housing and education and happiness for all people. There's a profound contradiction here. And it's a contradiction that often prevents us from building community. But of course, I could continue for a long time on this very important question. But because there are many more questions on the list, I believe, I think it's important to emphasize that it's not so much a question of reviving what we had in the past, but reimagining a future that is defined by justice and equality and freedom.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis. The next question we have here is, some educators do not see it as a responsibility to accommodate or put in additional effort to support disadvantaged students. What do you have to say to those that have this opinion?
Well, I think my first response would be that those who hold this opinion aren't living up to the calling of their job as educators. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody learns the same. And then when you bring into the picture, the kinds of structural constraints that we've been talking about, the forces that produce communities that do not have access to education.
I think you accidentally.
For some reason I got muted. I haven't even touched my mouse, so I don't know how that happened.
Like those internet waves, Dr. Davis.
Maybe it was what I was talking about.
No, could not have been.
Somebody didn't want that to be heard. But, I'm thinking about Frederick Douglass and the way in which he acquired his education. In his autobiography, he said that he literally stole his education because people who were enslaved, children who were enslaved, were not supposed to be given the opportunity to get educated. And so what he did was to basically ask the little white children around if he could see their speller or if he could see their book, and what does this, how do you pronounce this word? So he literally educated himself against the strictures of the prevailing society. And I would say that we still have structures in place today that provide for education for some. Some people get the very best of what we have to offer in this country in terms of education. And other people often don't even have the opportunity to learn how to read. Now, it is the educator's responsibility to try to traverse that broad expanse and figure out how one will teach both the child who has a huge amount of preparation and the child who has had absolutely none. That is the job of educators. And I come from a family of educators. Both my mother and father were teachers. And I can remember many, many years ago when I was growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, my mother had the reputation of being able to teach any child how to read, regardless of the existing problems. And of course, this was before we had all of the diagnoses of learning disorders. And she was able to teach anyone how to read. She could not use the same methodology for each child. And I think this is one of our problems in this society. We don't recognize difference in the way we should. We don't recognize difference, of course, when it comes to issues like race and gender and sexuality, but we also don't learn or organize differences in terms of how individuals learn. And I want a society in which all differences are recognized, in which individualities are recognized, and that does not prevent one from having access to the resources of that society.
Thank you. The next set of questions are going to specifically focus on supporting our students of color, specifically our Black students. And this one, I believe, came from an alum who happens to also serve on our committee. Representation matters. And the question is, as a Black woman in a STEM field, I definitely understand this. Is diversity hiring specifically for race and ethnicity appropriate, and why?
Absolutely, absolutely. Race, ethnicity, gender, nationality. I think that hiring should represent the diversity of our society. However, let me make the point that that is not enough. And unfortunately, at this point in the history of our country, too many people assume that all we have to do is embrace approaches that incorporate diversity, bring as many diverse populations into our educational institution, that the problem has been solved. And I always try to make the point that we have to go much further than that. We have to, first of all, examine the structural approaches that have engaged in this process of exclusion. And those approaches are still very much embodied within the institution itself. And so you can't, as W.E.B. Du Bois pointed out, with respect to the abolition of slavery almost 100 years ago, when he wrote his book in the 1930s on Black Reconstruction. He was referring to the period, of course, of the abolition of slavery in the 19th century. And he argued that it wasn't enough simply to get rid of the institution itself. One had to look at all of the ways in which that institution had influenced the larger society, and to recognize that the economics of the society, of the social relationships, the cultural relationships, all of that bore the imprint of slavery. And that if those did not change, then slavery was not truly abolished. And I want to draw from that to point out that if you simply bring a diverse population of students or faculty or staff into an institution without examining how the institution has been functioning, over the last period, what has been the impact of racism, for example, on the way the institution functions, then you're simply inviting previously excluded people to come into an institution that is still based on the policies and practices that were responsible for that exclusion. So I always like to add justice. We need diversity and we also need justice. We need to look at those who are being brought into the institution, but we have to also examine the ways in which the institution itself has to change in order to embody this impulse toward equality.
Outstanding. I think I'm going to have to make sure I get some more notes on this one because that was really an important note that you made there, which kind of leads me to this next question that they posed here. And it says, what can specifically a professor of any subject do in the classroom to support Black students?
And I would say in supporting Black students, other marginalized students, Indigenous students, students from Latinx communities, will also be served. And, first of all, I guess I want to make the point that we have a very long way to go. But that should not prevent people from acknowledging that we have to begin to make changes right now. At this moment. That means changes in curriculum. That means changing in terms of pedagogies. That means changing in terms of so many other structural elements of the process of generating education. And so individuals have to participate in that. But also larger communities have to be responsible and participate in that. So let me say that professors have a profound responsibility to incorporate new knowledges into the way in which they teach. We cannot act as if we're teaching in the 1950s or the 1960s or even in, pre-May 2020. Knowledge is not only generated in institutions of learning, of higher learning, such as Clovis Community College, such as the other colleges and universities in this country. We often act as if these sites are the only sites where knowledge matters and where knowledge is produced. I think it's important to recognize that knowledge gets produced in so many different contexts. And I like to use the term epistemology of practice. In the course of engaging in certain practices, knowledge knowledge emerges out of that process. So professors have to acknowledge this. Racism, well, first of all, let me say Black Lives Matter, okay? And professors, no matter what their subject, cannot ignore this awareness, this collective awareness that has been taken up by so many people, not only in this country, but all over the world. All over the Americas, all over this hemisphere, but also in other parts of the world, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia. So how is it possible to incorporate that awareness into one's pedagogies? Now, the person who asked the question before or talked about STEM, right? And oftentimes, science, technology, et cetera, are assumed to be excluded from this process. They're seen to be neutral. They seem to be race neutral. But we know now that so many Black people who have contributed to science and technology have been absolutely ignored. People saw that film Hidden Figures, for example, and that's just the tip of an iceberg. So I think it's important for professors to stretch, to learn and relearn. Being someone who is entrusted with teaching others how to generate knowledge is a profound task. And it means that we also have to continue learning. And my sense is that the more I feel as if the more I learn, the more I recognize I do not know. And I think incorporating that into the process will make it possible to recognize how all of these insights regarding the meaning of Black history, for example, regarding the question of racial and gender equality, regarding, for example, the non-binary character of gender. So, all of these insights are insights of struggle, and they have to be incorporated into the ways people who are entrusted in teaching coming generations engage in their pedagogy.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I've got quite a few colleagues from across our district. So our district is made up of 4 colleges. And one of the things that we've seen actually across our district is over the last couple of years, there's been a very, very significant drop in the enrollment of young men, specifically men of color. What advice can you provide on how to re-engage these young men?
Wow, this is about reimagining our society. We know that a disproportionate number of young men of color are behind bars. And I have, for a very long time, I've been involved in this effort to generate more consciousness of the role that what we now call mass incarceration plays in shaping our educational system. Hold on for 1 second. There is a connection between education and incarceration. And it's not only the school to prison pipeline, because oftentimes the pipeline goes the other way. The role that the prison industrial complex plays in shaping education. And why is it do young people, and I would say especially young boys of color, but young girls of color as well, why is it that they are learning how to negotiate carceral systems when they are in elementary school? You know, why is it that there are guards? Why is it that there are school resource officers? They call them school resource officers, but they're cops in schools who determine how students learn or don't learn. So I think that if one looks at the decreasing numbers of young men of color who are seeking access to education, you know, one has to ask, what are the societal constraints that have made them unaware of the value of education? If education to them means police in schools and going to juvenile justice facilities, then of course, I can't understand how there would be a desire to get an education if that is what education means for them. We have to thoroughly reimagine our entire society in order to even begin to solve that problem.
Dr. Davis, based on history and your personal experiences, how would you characterize African Americans' progress in the United States? And is there a consistent trend or lack of progress that you can identify?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah. You know, first of all, I do have to acknowledge the progress. And I think that the progress that we have made has happened precisely as a function of organized movements that have called for change. And what is so remarkable, and I make this point precisely because we are observing Black History Month, what is so remarkable about the struggle for Black freedom is that for hundreds of years, this impulse to fight for justice and equality and freedom has been passed down from one generation to the next. And this is remarkable that 500 years after the first Africans were brought to the Americas, and the first slave rebellions happened with the assistance of indigenous people, of course, Black people are still fighting. So, I mean, this is why this is such an important insight for everyone who loves justice and equality and freedom. And this is one of the reasons I think why people feel drawn to the Black freedom struggle, regardless of their racial background, because it symbolizes something really universal. It symbolizes what we all as human beings should desire. Now, having said that, I make the point that we have to celebrate our victories because things have changed. You know, when I was a child growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, which was the most segregated city in the country, Black children could not go to schools that were not designated for Black children. As a Black child, I couldn't even go to the amusement park, which I could see. So, I mean, I could go on and on about things that have actually changed. Now, the fact that the whole country is observing Black History Month, I think, is an example of progress. However, at the same time, there has been so little progress in terms of changing the structures that need to be transformed? Why is it that we are still involved in campaigns around police violence? Why is it that that George Floyd is the figure who captures what is going on in this era, in the 21st century, the third decade of the 21st century? We're still engaged in the struggles that Black people were involved in the immediate aftermath of slavery. So I want to say that on the one hand, there's been a great deal of progress because we've learned more effectively how to articulate these struggles. We've developed new vocabularies. We've developed new frameworks. And I would point out that in March of 2020, when more people went out into the streets to demonstrate than ever before in the history of this country. Not only more Black people and not only more people of color, but more white people went out in the streets. And that was not so much because there was a spontaneous response. It was because of the fact that for years and decades, some of us have been talking about structural racism. And, my life as an activist has been precisely defined by, various struggles from Emmett Till to, I would say, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. So we understand, I think, what it is we need to do much better today. We have a framework of abolition, and abolition allows us to recognize that we can't keep on doing exactly the same thing when no changes happen. We've been talking about reforming the police forever, and we're still talking about reforming the police. We've been talking about reforming prisons since prisons were invented, and we're still talking about reforming the police. And as a matter of fact, reform has kind of become the glue that has held these institutions together. So why isn't it time to imagine new ways of addressing harm, new ways of addressing the issues which usually cause us to automatically defer to the police? We need to reimagine what health and safety are all about. And safety does not have to involve using violence to address violence, because usually that's just a multiplication of the violence and we end up with more violence. So, let's talk about harm reduction that does not involve violence. Let's talk about healthcare, mental health care that doesn't come with a drawn gun. Let's talk about mental health care that is compassionate and that involves trained human beings who know how to deal with people who are in psychiatric crisis, for example.
You. Dr. Davis, you started this work at a very young age. And so this next question is for our students. Why is it important for students to be engaged in their college community? Can they really make a difference in the culture of the campus and their community?
I think students can make a difference. And students are the ones who are devoting their time to the examination and production of knowledge. What good is knowledge if it doesn't help to make our world a better place? To me, that's the ultimate goal of knowledge, to make our planet a more habitable, not only for human beings, but for those beings, non-human beings with whom we share this habitat. So students are the ones who are using their minds. Not that others don't, because I mean, I need to point out that there's a lot of amazing intellectual activity happening behind bars. And one of the reasons, you know, I want to see people who are in prison come out is because I think they have a great deal to offer. They can help us transform our society. But having said that knowledge is valuable insofar as it can create more freedom and more happiness for all beings, you know, students are the ones who should be leading that process of making knowledge relevant. And where better to start that than on the campus itself? Recognizing that a part of the process of generating change on college campuses is mentoring younger students. The student generation doesn't last very long, and we should actually, you know, learn about generationality, you know, from the need that students should experience of not only engaging in struggle, but also at the same time mentoring of those who are younger. And I mean younger not in terms of age, but in terms of where they are in the learning process, in terms of how much more time they will spend on the actual campus. So organizing and mentoring simultaneously. And that kind of reflects how freedom struggles unfold in the larger world. In my opinion, the most important aspect of those struggles is leaving a mark. You know, not only trying to make a change, but guaranteeing that those who come after you will also be prepared to push forward for change. And, you know, students can learn, you know, what kind of impact these organized movements can have on the world by beginning, you know, on the campus with all of the issues. I'm not going to even start enumerating the issues, but you know, I will say financial aid, for example. You know, that's and that also is a measure of the ways in which we need to change our society so that people can have access to education, regardless of their economic capacity. Education should not be a commodity. Education should be available to all who wish to engage in the process of learning.
Absolutely. And we are here for that. Should I make a pitch? No, I'm kidding. Dr. Davis, so this question here, do you or have you ever struggled with imposter syndrome? How do you ensure, or how did you ensure that your voice had agency?
Well, I know there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome these days, but I guess I would say that if you're not an inveterate narcissist, you've experienced that. And I think it's important to be humble. It's important to have humility and to recognize that we're never really good enough. We're always changing. We're always learning more. So that whole notion of imposter syndrome does not have to be formulated in the way that it usually is. It's about recognizing, as I said before, the more one learns, the more one recognizes how much one does not know. And that is always, I've always reminded myself of that, because I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I've learned a great deal from my students. I've learned a great deal from the movement of this last period. So I think that we want to position ourselves so that we're always learning, And I've never actually been concerned about my individual voice. And I know that people know me as an individual, and that has nothing to do with my own desires to be recognized. And I realize that people recognize me, my name, not primarily because of what I've done, but because of what other people have done. The movement that rescued me from first the death penalty and then life in prison is the reason I'm here today, and is also the reason why people know my name. So I'm concerned about collective agency. Now, people are always asking me, how do you want to be remembered? And my response is, I really don't care that much about how I get remembered as an individual, because individuals don't change history. It's collective, it's communities, it's people who figure out how to come together with their differences. Let me emphasize that more, who are responsible for making the changes. All of the presidents who've been talking about race in this country, I'll just say, I remember when Clinton was talking about having conversations on race. And then, of course, we had Obama and so forth and so on. But no president has been able to achieve what was achieved as a consequence of the response of people to the police lynching of George Floyd. Communities of people in struggle change history. And I want to be a part of those communities. And for me, that's all really that matters.
That was very encouraging. Oh my gosh. Dr. Davis, what achievement or moment in your life are you most proud of? Do you feel satisfied with the life that you've led? And if so, when did you know?
Oh, when did I know that I felt satisfied?
Like, yeah, you were like, yeah, I got this.
I don't think I've ever experienced that.
We're still working towards that part.
Because there's always something more. And I think that is what has kept me excited about life and about change. There's always something more to do. And I am not someone who likes to rest on my laurels, whatever they may be. And I'll tell you that I just recently published a book with 3 co-authors. It's called Abolition, Feminism Now. And of all the books I've written, that one was the hardest. Because if you think about the fact that when you sit down by yourself with your ideas and your research and you write what you want, but when you've got to run it by 3 other people, every single idea in the book, it's like really, really difficult. And at one point in the process, and we were writing this book during the pandemic on Zoom, of course, at one point I said, we are never going to achieve a common voice because, we're trained differently. We're all scholar activists, but as sociologists, as an education person, a literature person, I'm a philosophy person. And we actually did eventually achieve a collective voice that was not the voice of any of us individually. And that was so exciting. That was, something I really doubted that we were going to be able to do, although theoretically I talk about that all the time because that's what our organizing is about. And that's what achieving community is about. Yeah, I guess that's one of the things I'm really proud of. But I would also like to say that I'm really glad that I persisted and with others, because I know that we would not be where we are today if there hadn't been those of us who were, who knew that at some point that people would get it. And I'm thinking about people who've been talking about structural racism since the 1970s, and repeating it over and over again. And I've also learned something about the value of repetition, as opposed to just thinking like you sound like a broken record. I've been saying this for 40 years. I've been saying this for 50 years. This is how people feel oftentimes. And nothing changes. But, sometimes the temporality is not one that we're used to. And if we think about what the change that was able to occur in the consciousness of people, because there were those of us who kept basically saying the same thing. Of course, we've become more, I think, effective at articulating it, and our vocabularies have changed. But I feel really, really proud of the fact that along with many others, I had something to do with the consciousness that took shape during this period. But I can't be satisfied with it. Let me put it that way.
No, thank you for that. And I love the part about the value of repetition, because we, I think, do say and hear that a lot. I've been trying to do this and I've said it over and over again, but to understand the value, I think, is very powerful. So I've got some questions that individuals have posted, which is really nice. So once again, if anyone out there would like to send a question over, please do so, either to Patrick or Liz, and we will get those. So I'll start with this one, and you kind of addressed this a little bit, Dr. Davis, but what do you think is the most effective way to cause change in today's political world? And the second part to that is, should we focus on solving local issues through mutual aid or participating in government?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to, I guess I would say, deconstruct the question.
Sure.
Because I've come to recognize that either or questions are not as productive as we might think they are. And by posing questions in terms of either or, we limit our responses to one pole or the other. And one of the lessons I've learned from, I would say, anti-racist, anti-capitalist feminism is that we can do both and. We don't have to limit ourselves to one or the other. And that, having said that, I would say there's so much we can do to bring about change. And it doesn't happen within one particular venue or one particular space or in one particular path. I think, and this is an insight that has been generated as a result of years and years of experience in organizing movements, that we need everyone, and we need everyone's talents. And people should not have to ignore their own personal proclivities, their own personal talents in order to make change in the world. That change should happen through those ways in which human beings feel fulfilled and feel as if they are efficient. So if you are a person in STEM, look at ways within the field that you can begin to push for change. If you are an artist or a musician, recognize that music and art always drive us in the direction of change. And that, as I say over and over again, this is one of the other things that I've tried to repeat, is that art and music can make us feel that which we do not yet know how to put into words. And so that is a powerful means of ushering in change. As educators, we do it in the classroom. And we don't indoctrinate our students. We encourage our students to ask questions. We engage in critical thinking and critical processes, and recognizing that nothing should be immune to critical questioning. So I could go on. I think we create our arenas of struggle where we are with the tools that we are capable of using. It's not necessary to leave one field where one feels as if one is fulfilled, and where one feels that one has been drawn there in order to enter a field of struggle for social justice. Social justice is required everywhere. So use the talents that you have, and your own individual dreams as a way to help you contribute to a collective effort to bring about change.
Thank you. The next one, Dr. Davis, actually there's two that are very similar, and it has to do with burnout. And I think this probably is worded really well here, is how do you get re-inspired or rejuvenated when you get discouraged in this type of work?
I would say that, first of all, trying to extricate oneself from the yeah, someone muted me again. Now you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
I would say that challenging individualism is really important. And oftentimes burnout is a syndrome that is experienced precisely because we don't see ourselves as a part of a collective. We see ourselves as the source of all of the work. And if we truly participate in and embody and understand community, we realize that the work is a collective job. It's not the work of an individual. And when an individual gets tired, that individual has to rest without fearing that the work is not going to happen, because we know that we are a part of a larger effort and that others will carry on. So you don't kill yourself, trying to do what you need a whole community for. And that's an insight that was generated, as a consequence of collective struggle. And I appreciate that, because it has made me realize that when I need to rest, I can. When I need to go listen to some good jazz to feel rejuvenated, that's still a part of what we have to do in order to move forward in this struggle. And I don't feel as if I am in some way neglecting to perform my duties to the movement. One of the things that has been so wonderful is all of the new insights from young activists and the Black Lives Matter movement, and although some of those who founded Black Lives Matter are a little older now. They were in their 20s, and now they're in their 30s, but they have this insight about the importance of self-care, that you have to incorporate self-care into the movement itself, and that it has to be collective. It's not that I leave the movement in order to take care of myself as an individual, but as members of the collective, we all have a collective responsibility to everyone to ensure that they are healthy physically and mentally and spiritually.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. This next question, I think it's very interesting, actually, the way it's written. Dr. Davis, if you could host a dinner party, who would be your guests and why?
That's something that I have done many times.
I'm sure you have.
But I'm going to use that question as an opportunity to talk about those who would not be able to come because they have been caught up in this carceral web. My co-defendant 50 years ago is still in prison. And it's been like almost 60 years. Can you imagine living your entire life behind bars? It's hard to imagine. But then some people have really transformed that absolutely impossible set of circumstances into something that has been productive and intellectually fulfilling. And to me, if I could have like Leonard Peltier and Mumia Abu-Jamal and Assata Shakur, who's in exile still, but not only those whose names we know, but those who have been generating new ideas under those horrendous circumstances. And let me say that whenever I am able to interact with people who are in prison, whether it's on Zoom, I did a couple of Zoom sessions with people in a California prison, I won't say exactly where, recently, and it was just so amazing. I know that those of us who refer to ourselves as abolitionists, I know that those ideas have come in the very first place from people who are incarcerated. And the new academic field that we refer to as critical prison studies, which is an interdisciplinary approach to the impact of prison on our society, the foundational knowledges were created by people in prison. So I want us to understand, how much people like, George Jackson, who was assassinated in 1971, was the first person in my experience who insisted on a deeper examination of the work that the prison does in our society. While there were those of us who were simply talking about free political prisoners, and that was important and is important as well, to free political prisoners. But he was arguing that the significance of the prison goes much further than simply incarcerating people for their political beliefs and affiliations. And so I would like to have a dinner party in which we acknowledge the amazing intellectual production that happens behind walls, and in which we talk about what we are going to do to get rid of this horrendous system, both in the US and throughout the world.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you, let me see, where did it go? Do you have any advice on how to deal with resistance from colleagues or administrators in regard to equity and diversity measures? How do you shape the discussion that is to make it less combative and more collegial?
Well, it depends on who's participating in the conversation. And sometimes it is combative. And I don't think that that we have to shy away from that. And I know oftentimes Black women in particular are so afraid of being typed as the angry Black woman that they are afraid to express their righteous anger. But sometimes anger is appropriate. And I think that what one does is to not engage in insular conversations, small conversations, but to make sure that you have support. There are those who often talk about being the only voice of resistance in the room. Now, if you're the only voice of resistance in the room and you don't have any support anywhere, you may as well give up. It doesn't make sense to keep having that conversation. But if you have your support, you've got to figure out always who has your back, or who's standing next to you. Always, that is the very first thing one does. And then those conversations can become more capacious. Those conversations can become more productive.
Excellent. Thank you for that, because actually there was two others who asked that very same question. So it is something I think across our district that a lot of us deal with, and it's important. We talk a lot about allyship and the importance of that. And I think this one kind of goes to that. What is one of the best ways to develop allyship?
Mm-hmm. Well, allyship is absolutely essential. But sometimes I think we have to question whether it's really about allyship. And I really embrace the term, because it has allowed us to insist on the importance of people of color giving leadership to struggles when they have in the past become marginalized. I mean, if we look at the history of the struggle for Black freedom, organizations like the NAACP were majority white, and even in the student movements that helped to launch voter registration in the South, SNCC and so forth, there were people who were complaining that white people come in as allies and then they want to take over. So having said that, I want to also say something else. And I don't think that, I think that they may be contradictory, but I think it's often important to hold contradictions in tension. People should not assume that just because of their racial identity, that they do not have a stake in the future of this country. And the struggle against racism, the struggle against gender violence, the struggle for trans equality, all of these issues are about democracy. And they should be equally embraced by everyone who believes in freedom. And I think it's, you know, white people have to look at how damaging racism has been to this country. How could someone like the person who was the president of the country once, not very long ago, the last president, how could a phenomenon like that happen? I mean, this is what racism generates. I want to, I mean, I say this because there are other histories that are subjugated histories, the histories of so many people who are not Black, who participated in the Black struggle. The Black liberation struggle has not been simply a struggle that has been carried on by Black people. So indigenous people, as I pointed out, people in Latinx communities. If one looks at the ways in which Palestinians have embraced the Black movement and helped to make it more global and more focused on the kinds of international struggles that we need in order to achieve Black liberation at home. So I guess I want, you know, both allyship, but I also want those who consider themselves allies to realize that they're not just allies in a struggle that doesn't primarily affect them, but they're also full subjects in a quest for democracy for everyone.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we're down to the, gosh, time has flown by. Almost done, but I do want to ask this one question that just popped up, just because I think it's, I know we've got a lot of avid readers here, and that is, Dr. Davis, what are some of your favorite books that you would recommend?
Oh, wow. You know, read anything by Toni Morrison.
There you go.
Anything by Toni Morrison. Also read work by Ruha Benjamin. Ruha Benjamin, we're talking about STEM and her work on technology and racism. And she has a new book coming out really soon that I'm in the process of reading in manuscript right now. And Dorothy Roberts is another amazing, she is a legal studies scholar, and she writes about, her most recent book is called Torn Apart, and it's about the Child Protective Services system. And it's about the ways in which that is a policing system, that embodies the very structures of policing and links children who have, you know, problems in the way in which they grow up to carceral solutions. Yeah, Miriam Kaba, she's you know, wonderful. She writes on abolition. Oh my God, I can just go on. Margaret Burnham is just doing a new book on the, Margaret Burnham my oldest friend in the world, and we grew up together, and she was my attorney when I was on trial. She's a law professor at Northeastern and has written a book, which I think will be out in a few months, that is about all of the ways in which racist violence in the South helped to create this structural racism of the law and the police. And so she and her law students have gone down to Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and Georgia, and they've tried to find remedies for people who got run out of town by the Ku Klux Klan, whose land got stolen. And she has this wonderful phrase in the book, terror needs the law needs terror. So I could go on for the next hour talking about books that I have found really exciting during this period. But you know, during the pandemic, a lot of people have written books. So that's, you know, one of the upsides of a time where there's so much suffering and death. And you know, we have to push on in every way we can. I would say music that has been produced during this period. Listen to Terry Lynn Carrington's, you know, social science. Terry Lynn Carrington has a new album that's coming out. It's not out yet, and it's called New Standards, and it is music, jazz music by women that deserves to be considered standards. You know, jazz musicians, they learn all of the standards, and how many standards have been written by women? Not very many. So this is about ways in which the whole field of jazz is now being challenged to extricate itself from patriarchy.
Wow. We might have to reconnect and get the list here even extended. I'm sure people on the Zoom would love to see what other recommendations you would have. But we are, again, to the end of our presentation. Dr. Davis, thank you so much again for being here with us. Is there any last parting bits of advice or your closing remarks that you'd like to share?
Well, you know, I would say that we perhaps need to revisit how we treat victories. Mm-hmm. And victories are never victories. I would say that we treat them as launching pads for new struggles. And also recognize that this particular period, at this moment where we don't see huge numbers of people in the streets, is a very important one because the work is being done at the level of institutions that was not being done before. And if you see those who seemed originally to embrace more radical approaches, and now they've become a little more conservative, recognize that this is the way change happens. It kind of zigzags, it goes forward, one step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 1 step back. So yeah, I would urge people to think in a way that allows us to imagine new futures.
Thank you. How about a big round of applause? If you guys want to turn your videos on, thank you so much for joining us. To all our colleagues across the district, thank you for Zooming in as well. We hope you have an amazing rest of the afternoon. You've got lots of love coming through there, Dr. Davis, if you can see all the emojis there. So again, a wonderful conversation, truly an honor to have you with us. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, everyone.